Welcome to my channel. Try to hear the latest story.
I sat at my childhood dining table during Sunday dinner, having just announced my promotion to senior partner at my financial firm. My father, Gerald, interrupted with venomous words about being 32, single and childless, calling me a complete disappointment to the family name. The room fell silent as my mother, Sarah, looked away uncomfortably, my younger sister, Emma, shifted awkwardly, and my brother-in-law, Tom, stared at his plate. I felt my world crashing down as the man I'd spent decades trying to please delivered the most devastating blow of my life. The silence stretched across that dining room like thick fog, suffocating every breath I tried to take. Gerald's words echoed in my skull while I stared at the roast beef growing cold on my plate. 32 years old, and this was how my own father saw me. A disappointment, a failure. Someone who couldn't even manage the basic human tasks of finding a wife and starting a family. But sitting there in that uncomfortable quiet, something else began creeping into my consciousness. Something that made my stomach churn with a different kind of nausea. The irony of his statement hit me like a freight train barreling through my chest. I glanced around the room, taking inventory of everything my eyes landed on. The mahogany dining table we sat around had been purchased 3 years ago, when Gerald claimed his consulting work was picking up. The new leather recliner in the living room where he watched his evening news. The 65-inch television mounted on the wall. Sarah's freshly painted fingernails, and the expensive highlights in her hair. Emma's designer purse hanging from her chair. All of it paid for by me. Every single dollar. My mind drifted back 8 years to the phone call that changed everything. Gerald's gruff voice on the other end pried, swallowed just enough to admit he'd lost his construction job after a workplace injury damaged his back. The medical bills were piling up. The mortgage was behind. Sarah's part-time librarian salary couldn't cover their monthly expenses. Just until I get back on my feet, he'd promised. Maybe 6 months tops. That was 8 years ago. Since then, I'd been writing checks every month like clockwork. $2,000 for their mortgage, $800 for utilities, $300 for Gerald's diabetes medication that insurance wouldn't fully cover, $400 for Sarah's physical therapy sessions, whatever they needed for car repairs, household emergencies, or unexpected expenses. I did the math in my head, something I'd been avoiding for years. Over $96,000. Nearly $100,000 of my hard-earned money had flowed directly into their household, while I lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment 15 miles away, driving a 7-year-old Honda Civic and eating dinner from the microwave most nights. While Gerald sat there calling me a disappointment, I couldn't help but calculate what my life might have looked like if I'd kept that money for myself. The vacation to Europe I'd always wanted to take. The downtown loft I'd looked at but couldn't afford. The dinners at nice restaurants instead of fast food between client meetings. Maybe I could have taken Sarah Martinez from accounting out somewhere impressive, instead of suggesting coffee at the diner near my office. The cruel twist hit me harder than Gerald's insults ever could. How many potential relationships had I avoided because I was embarrassed about my limited spending money? How many times had I made excuses when friends invited me to expensive events or weekend trips? How many women had I declined to ask out because I couldn't afford the kind of dates that might impress them? I thought about Jennifer, the beautiful blonde from my gym, who'd smiled at me for months before finally giving up when I never asked her for dinner. Or Rachel, my neighbor, who'd hinted about wanting to try the new steakhouse downtown before she stopped making eye contact in the hallway. All because I was funneling 60% of my income into maintaining the lifestyle of the man now calling me a failure. Gerald continued chewing his roast beef, completely oblivious to the storm building inside my head. He'd been playing the role of successful family patriarch for years, taking credit for their comfortable lifestyle, while I sacrificed my own happiness to fund the illusion. I remembered countless conversations with my neighbors and colleagues who praised Gerald's generosity and wisdom. "Your father must be doing really well for himself," they'd say. "It's wonderful how he's able to help everyone in the family." If only they knew the truth. If only they realized that the man they admired for his financial success was actually living off his son's paycheck, while publicly mocking that same son's life choices. The most painful part wasn't even the money itself. It was the realization that my financial support had become so seamlessly integrated into their lifestyle that they'd forgotten it was a gift, not an obligation. Gerald had grown comfortable enough with my contributions that he felt entitled to criticize the very person making his comfort possible. Sarah cleared her throat softly, breaking the silence. "Luke, honey, maybe we should talk about something else." But I wasn't ready to let this moment pass. For 8 years, I'd swallowed my pride and written those checks without complaint. I'd convinced myself I was being a good son, a responsible family member. I'd told myself that my sacrifice was noble, that supporting my parents was what mature adults did. Now, staring across the table at Gerald's smug expression, I realized I'd been enabling something much uglier than temporary financial hardship. I'd been funding his ability to judge me while contributing nothing meaningful to his own household. The construction injury had been real. The initial financial crisis had been legitimate. But somewhere along the way, my temporary help had transformed into permanent dependence, and Gerald had twisted that dependence into a weapon to use against my character. He reached for his wine glass, the expensive Cabernet he'd insisted on buying last week, with money I'd transferred for household essentials. The irony was suffocating. "Maybe if you focused less on work and more on finding a decent woman, you wouldn't be in this situation," Gerald continued, apparently not finished with his character assassination. "At your age, most men have figured out their priorities." That's when I discovered something that made my blood run ice cold. Earlier that week, while helping Sarah organize some paperwork in their home office, I'd accidentally seen receipts for purchases I didn't recognize. A $1,500 drill set, a motorcycle helmet, expensive fishing equipment. When I'd asked Sarah about them, she'd gotten flustered and changed the subject. Now, sitting at this dinner table while Gerald lectured me about priorities, I realized he'd been using my money not just for necessities, but for luxuries. He'd been treating my financial support like his personal shopping budget while maintaining the fiction that he was financially independent. The man calling me a disappointment had been living off my generosity while buying toys for himself. 2 weeks passed before the phone rang at 10:30 on a Tuesday night. Emma's voice came through my cell phone between broken sobs, immediately snapping me out of the financial spreadsheet I'd been reviewing for a client. "Luke, I don't know what to do. I'm so embarrassed and confused, and Tom is furious, and I just need someone to talk to." I set down my pen and walked to the kitchen, pouring myself a glass of water, while Emma collected herself enough to explain what had happened. She and Tom were planning their 10th wedding anniversary celebration for next month, hoping to throw a party that would bring together friends and family who hadn't seen each other in years. "We've been saving for months," she said, her voice still shaky. "We found this beautiful venue at the Riverside Club, you know, the one overlooking the lake where Mom and Dad used to take us fishing. The rental fee is $5,000, but we figured it would be worth it for such a special occasion." I knew the place well. It was gorgeous, but expensive, exactly the kind of location that would create the magical evening Emma had always dreamed about for her milestone anniversary. Tom and I scraped together $3,000, and we thought we had everything figured out. But then the venue manager called today asking about the remaining balance, and that's when everything fell apart. My stomach began to knot as I sensed where this conversation was heading. Dad promised us he would cover the last $2,000. He said it would be his gift to us, that he was proud to help make our celebration special. But when I called him today to confirm the payment details, he got really weird and evasive. Emma's voice broke again, and I could hear Tom's frustrated muttering in the background. He kept saying he needed to check his accounts and move some money around, but Luke, the party is in 3 weeks. We've already sent invitations to 60 people. I've ordered flowers and a caterer and a photographer. If we can't pay the venue, we'll have to cancel everything. I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar weight of my family's financial dysfunction settling onto my shoulders once again. Gerald had made another promise using money that wasn't his, just like he'd been doing for years. Emma, did Dad specifically say where this money would come from? That's what's so confusing. He kept talking about how well his consulting business has been doing lately, how he's been landing bigger contracts and building up savings. He made it sound like $2,000 wouldn't be a problem at all. The consulting business that didn't exist, the savings account that was actually my monthly transfers, the success story that was completely fictional. But here's the part that really bothers me, Emma continued. When I pressed him about it today, he started saying things about how maybe Tom and I should learn to live within our means. He said something about how he's tired of family members expecting handouts, and that maybe it's time people started taking responsibility for their own financial decisions. My jaw clenched. Gerald was actually lecturing Emma about financial responsibility while living entirely off my income. Luke, I'm so confused. For years, Dad has been generous with everyone. Remember when Cousin Janet needed help with her down payment? Dad stepped right up. When Uncle Steve's business was struggling, Dad helped him through it. He's always been the person family members could count on for financial support. Every example Emma listed was money that had come from my account, not Gerald's. He'd been playing the role of family benefactor, using my earnings while I remained invisible in the background. Now suddenly he's acting like we're being irresponsible for asking for help with something he already promised. Tom is talking about taking out a loan, but our credit is already stretched thin from buying the house last year. Tom's voice became clearer as he apparently moved closer to the phone. Luke, can you talk some sense into your father? This whole situation doesn't make sense. One day he's offering to pay for everything, the next day he's acting like we're trying to take advantage of him. I rubbed my forehead, feeling a headache building behind my eyes. How could I explain that their father-in-law wasn't actually in a position to help anyone, that his apparent financial success was an elaborate fiction funded by his son? Emma, let me ask you something. Over the years, when Dad has helped other family members, did you ever see the actual money change hands? Did you ever witness him writing checks or making transfers? Well, no, I mean, people don't usually do that stuff in front of everyone. Why would that matter? Just curious about the details, that's all. Emma was quiet for a moment before continuing with something that made my blood pressure spike. Actually, now that you mention it, there was something else Dad said today that really hurt my feelings. When I reminded him that he'd promised to help, he said something about how I should talk to you about money instead. My grip tightened on the phone. He said that you make good money at your job, but that you're not very responsible with it. He said that's probably why you're still single, because women can sense when a man doesn't have his financial priorities straight. He suggested that maybe you could learn something from this situation about budgeting and planning ahead. The room started spinning. Gerald had taken my financial support, used it to play the role of successful family patriarch, and then turned around and criticized my financial management to justify his inability to follow through on promises made with my money. Emma, I need to tell you something important, but I want you to sit down first. Luke, you're scaring me. What's going on? The money Dad has been using to help family members over the years, the lifestyle he and Mom have been living, the financial security that's allowed him to make generous promises to people. None of it is his money. Silence stretched across the phone line for several long seconds. What do you mean? I mean, I've been paying their mortgage for 8 years. I cover their utilities, Dad's medication, Mom's medical expenses, car repairs, everything. The money he's been using to help Cousin Janet and Uncle Steve and everyone else came from my bank account, not his. Well, Luke, that can't be right. Dad talks all the time about his consulting contracts and his business income and how well he's doing. Emma, Dad hasn't had real income in 8 years. The consulting work is fiction. He's been living off my financial support while taking credit for generosity that I've been funding. I could hear Tom's voice in the background asking Emma what was happening, his tone growing increasingly concerned. But Luke, if what you're saying is true, then why would Dad criticize your financial management to other people? Why would he suggest that you're irresponsible with money? That question cut deeper than anything Gerald had said to my face. He wasn't just taking my money and claiming credit for his generosity. He was actively damaging my reputation to cover his tracks, making sure that if anyone questioned his financial capacity, they would blame me instead of investigating his claims. Emma, I think Dad has been telling people I'm financially irresponsible because it gives him an excuse when he can't follow through on promises. If everyone believes I'm bad with money, then they won't expect me to help, and they won't question where his money actually comes from. The silence on Emma's end stretched so long, I thought the call had dropped. Emma, are you still there? Luke, are you telling me that the $2,000 Dad promised us for the anniversary party is actually your money, and that he's been planning to ask you to cover his promise without telling us that's what he was doing? That's exactly what I'm telling you. Tom's voice exploded in the background. That manipulative son of a... Emma, hang up the phone. We're driving over there right now. This whole thing is completely insane. But Emma wasn't finished processing the implications. Luke, if Dad has been doing this for years, then how many times have family members thanked him for help that you actually provided? How many times have people praised his generosity when it was really your sacrifice making the difference? Every time I thought to myself, every single time. Saturday morning found me sitting in my Honda Civic outside my parents' house, gripping the steering wheel and trying to build up courage for a conversation I'd been avoiding for 8 years. The maple trees lining their street had turned brilliant shades of orange and red, a beautiful backdrop for what I knew would be an ugly confrontation. I'd spent 3 days rehearsing what I wanted to say, practicing different approaches in my bathroom mirror and during my morning commute. Stay calm. Stick to facts. Set clear boundaries. Don't let him turn this into an emotional manipulation. The sound of power tools came from their garage as I walked up the driveway. Gerald stood hunched over a workbench assembling what looked like an expensive router, set still partially wrapped in packaging. Price stickers from Home Depot were visible on several pieces, and my stomach dropped as I calculated what this latest purchase must have cost. Dad, we need to talk. He looked up from his project, wiping his hands on a shop rag that looked brand new. Everything in the garage looked brand new, actually. A complete socket wrench, set still in its molded plastic case. A pneumatic nail gun hanging from a pegboard hook. A rolling tool chest that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Luke, good timing. I was just organizing some equipment for a potential consulting project. Client wants me to build custom cabinets for his office renovation. I stared at the elaborate setup, knowing with absolute certainty that no such client existed. Gerald hadn't done actual construction work in years, not since his injury made it impossible for him to handle the physical demands of the job. This was just more evidence of how he'd been spending my money while maintaining his fiction of professional success. Dad, that's actually what I want to discuss. I think we need to have an honest conversation about money and boundaries, and what's been happening in this family for the past 8 years. Gerald's expression immediately hardened. He set down the router and crossed his arms, taking a defensive stance that I recognized from childhood arguments. Let me guess. Emma called you crying about her anniversary party, and now you want to lecture me about financial responsibility. Well, let me tell you something, son. I've been supporting this family since before you were born, and I don't need advice from someone who can't even figure out how to get married. The attack came so quickly that I almost stepped backward. This was his strategy, I realized. Whenever someone questioned his behavior, he immediately went on the offensive, deflecting attention by attacking their character instead. Dad, I'm not here to lecture you. I'm here to talk about the reality of our financial arrangement and how it needs to change. Financial arrangement? Gerald's voice rose sharply. Is that what you call family loyalty? Supporting your parents when they need help is an arrangement now. Dad, it stopped being temporary help years ago. I've been paying your mortgage, your utilities, your medical expenses, your car payments. I've covered every major expense in this household while you've been spending money on tools and equipment for work that doesn't exist. Gerald's face turned red, a vein bulging in his forehead that I remembered from his worst temper tantrums when I was growing up. You ungrateful little bastard. Do you have any idea what your mother and I sacrificed to raise you? The money we spent on your education, your sports equipment, your college tuition? You think you can just calculate that down to dollars and cents? This isn't about repaying childhood expenses, Dad. This is about you making promises to family members using money that isn't yours and then criticizing me to cover your tracks when you can't deliver. I never made any promises I couldn't keep. You promised Emma $2,000 for her anniversary party. Where exactly is that money going to come from? Gerald's jaw worked silently for several seconds before he found his footing again. That's between Emma and me. If you're so concerned about her party, maybe you should offer to help instead of standing here questioning my financial decisions. The manipulation was breathtaking in its audacity. He was literally asking me to solve a problem he'd created with my money while pretending he had no knowledge of where the solution would come from. Dad, I want to show you something. I pulled out my phone and opened the banking app, scrolling to my transaction history. 8 years of monthly transfers to Gerald's account totaling nearly $100,000. This is what I've contributed to your household since you lost your job. Every month like clockwork money flowing from my account to yours. Money that's prevented me from saving for my own future. From moving to a better apartment. From taking vacations, from living the kind of life that might actually attract a wife. Gerald glanced at the phone screen but dismissed it with a wave of his hand. So what family takes care of family? That's what real men do, Luke. They step up when they're needed instead of whining about sacrifice. But you haven't stepped up, Dad. You've been living off my sacrifice while taking credit for generosity that I've been funding. And worse than that, you've been telling people that I'm financially irresponsible to explain why you can't follow through on your promises. I never said anything like that. Emma told me exactly what you said. You told her that women can sense when a man doesn't have his financial priorities straight, implying that's why I'm still single. You criticized my money management to justify your inability to pay for something you'd promised to cover. Gerald's expression shifted, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of shame in his eyes. But it was quickly replaced by something harder and more calculating. Listen to me carefully, Luke. I don't care what Emma thinks she heard or what twisted version of events you've constructed in your head. I am the father in this family, and you are the son. That means you respect me, and you support me, and you don't question my decisions or my methods. Sarah's voice interrupted from the doorway, leading into the house. Gerald, please don't yell. The neighbors will hear. She stood there in her robe and slippers, looking small and frightened, clearly having been listening to our argument from inside. Luke, honey, maybe this conversation would be better having inside where it's private. No, Sarah, this conversation is exactly where it needs to be. Our son needs to understand his place in this family and his obligations to the people who raised him. Gerald turned back to me with renewed aggression. You want to talk about manipulation, and Luke? Let me tell you what manipulation actually looks like. Manipulation is threatening to cut off support for your sick father because you're embarrassed about your own life failures. Manipulation is trying to blame your loneliness and your inability to find a wife on the people who love you most. The accusations were so twisted, so completely opposite to reality, that I felt dizzy trying to process them. Dad, I never threatened to cut off support. I'm asking for honesty about where the money goes and accountability for how it's being used. Same thing, Luke. You're using money as a weapon to control me. And that's not how family relationships work. Sarah stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. Gerald, please. He's just trying to have a conversation. Maybe we could all sit down and talk about this calmly. Sarah, stay out of this. This is between me and my son. Gerald's attention returned to me with laser focus. Here's what's going to happen, Luke. You're going to apologize for disrespecting me in my own home. You're going to continue your financial contributions to this household, because that's what grateful sons do for their parents. And you're going to stop spreading lies about my business or my financial situation to other family members. And if I don't, then you can find yourself a new family because you won't be welcome in this one. The threat hit like a physical blow. Gerald was willing to completely sever our relationship rather than acknowledge the truth about our financial dynamic or take accountability for his deception. But what shocked me most was what happened next. Gerald walked over to his workbench and pulled out a piece of paper from beneath a stack of instruction manuals. As a matter of fact, Luke, I want you to see something that might refresh your memory about our agreement. He handed me a handwritten note that made my heart stop. It was written on notebook paper in my handwriting dated 6 years ago, promising to provide ongoing financial support for my parents as long as they needed it. The signature at the bottom looked exactly like mine. I had you write this when you first started helping us just to make sure we were all clear about the arrangement. You promised, Luke, in writing. You committed to this responsibility, and now you're trying to back out when it becomes inconvenient. I stared at the paper, my mind racing. I had no memory of writing such a document. The handwriting looked like mine, but the wording seemed wrong somehow. The signature was perfect, but I couldn't remember ever signing anything like this. Dad, I don't remember writing this. Well, that's interesting because you were completely sober when you did it. Maybe your memory isn't as reliable as you think it is. Sarah moved closer to look at the paper, her face growing pale as she read it. Gerald, I don't remember Luke writing this either. When did this happen? Sarah, you were at your book club that night. Luke and I had a long conversation about expectations and responsibilities, and we both agreed it would be better to have everything in writing. The manipulation was so sophisticated, so carefully planned, that I realized Gerald had been preparing for this confrontation for years. He'd somehow created documentation that would make me appear legally and morally obligated to continue funding his lifestyle indefinitely. Looking at that forged document, I finally understood the full scope of what I was dealing with. This wasn't just financial dependence or emotional manipulation. Gerald had been systematically building a case to ensure his control over my income would be permanent, creating evidence that would support his version of events if I ever tried to establish boundaries. He'd been planning to own me for the rest of my life. I left my parents' house that Saturday afternoon with my head spinning and my hands shaking so badly I had to pull over 3 blocks away to collect myself. The forged document sat on my passenger seat like a piece of evidence from a crime scene, which I was beginning to realize it actually was. 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from Jake Morrison in a coffee shop downtown, watching my accountant friend's expression grow increasingly alarmed as I explained the situation. Luke, what you're describing isn't just financial manipulation. This is identity theft and fraud. If your father has been forging your signature on documents, you could be legally liable for obligations you never agreed to take on. Jake had been my study partner in business school and now ran his own accounting practice, specializing in financial investigations. If anyone could help me untangle this mess, it would be him. I need to understand the full scope of what's been happening, I told him. I need to know exactly where my money has been going and whether there are other documents I don't know about. First thing we need to do is contact your bank and request a complete transaction history going back 8 years. Then we'll need to cross-reference every transfer with legitimate expenses versus discretionary spending. Jake opened his laptop and started making notes as we talked. You mentioned your father has been using your support as collateral for additional credit. That's a huge red flag. If he's been listing your income or assets as backing for loans or credit cards, you could be on the hook for debt you never authorized. The coffee in my stomach turned acidic as I realized how much deeper this rabbit hole might go. Jake, is there a way to find out if someone has been using my financial information to secure credit without my knowledge? Absolutely. We can pull your credit report and look for any accounts or inquiries you didn't initiate. We can also check public records for any liens or judgments that might have been filed using your information. We spent the next 2 hours going through my banking records on Jake's laptop. What we discovered made my original estimate of $96,000 look conservative. Luke, according to these records, you've transferred over $120,000 to your father's account over the past 8 years. But that's just the direct transfers. Look at this. Jake pointed to a series of smaller transactions I'd forgotten about. Emergency car repair, $800. Medical bill payment, $600. Home insurance deductible, $1,000. These one-off payments add up to another $15,000 easily. So we're looking at nearly $140,000 total. At least. But here's what really concerns me. Jake scrolled to a different section of my transaction history. Look at the pattern of cash withdrawals from your father's account immediately after your transfers. Large amounts being withdrawn in cash within 24 hours of receiving your money. That's not the behavior of someone using funds for legitimate household expenses. My stomach dropped as I saw what Jake was pointing out. Almost every month, Gerald would withdraw significant portions of my transfers in cash, leaving just enough in his account to cover the mortgage and utility payments that could be traced. What would he need that much cash for? That's what we need to find out. Cash transactions are harder to track, but they often indicate activities someone doesn't want documented. Gambling, unauthorized purchases, payments to individuals who don't accept checks or credit cards. Jake made more notes before looking up with a serious expression. Luke, I think we need to involve the authorities in this investigation. What you're describing could constitute elder abuse in reverse, where the adult child is being financially exploited by the parent. It's less common than traditional elder abuse, but it's definitely prosecutable. I don't want to send my father to jail, Jake. I just want the truth, and I want it to stop. I understand, but you need to protect yourself legally. If your father has been forging documents or using your identity for financial gain, you could be held responsible for things you had no knowledge of. That afternoon, Jake referred me to Patricia Williams, a credit counselor who specialized in identity theft cases. Patricia's office was in a sterile building downtown, but her warm demeanor immediately put me at ease. Mr. Thompson, I've reviewed the preliminary information Jake provided, and I have to say this is one of the more sophisticated cases of family financial fraud I've encountered. Patricia pulled up my credit report on her computer screen. The good news is that your credit score is actually quite strong. Your father hasn't been taking out loans or credit cards in your name. The bad news is what I found when I dug a little deeper. She turned her monitor so I could see what she was looking at. Your father has been listing you as a co-signer on several accounts without your knowledge. A home equity line of credit for $15,000. A business credit card with a $5,000 limit. A personal loan for $8,000. The room started spinning again. How is that possible? I never signed anything. That's what makes this case so concerning. Either your father has samples of your signature that he's been using to forge documents, or he's been intercepting mail and handling transactions over the phone using your personal information. Patricia clicked through several more screens. I also found something else that's going to upset you. Your father has been using your employment information and income details to qualify for credit that he couldn't obtain on his own. Essentially, he's been representing himself as having financial backing from you without your consent. What does that mean for me legally? It means you could be held responsible for these debts if the creditors decide to pursue collection. It also means your father has committed multiple felonies. That evening, I drove to Danny's Pub, a local bar, where I knew Gerald spent time with his friends. Danny McCormick had been tending bar there for 15 years and knew everyone in the neighborhood. Luke Thompson, good to see you, buddy. How's the finance world treating you? Can't complain, Danny. Listen, I wanted to ask you about something. My dad comes in here pretty regularly, right? Oh yeah, Gerald's a fixture. Usually here 3 or 4 nights a week, sometimes more. Great guy, always buying rounds for the house, telling stories about his business success. We love having him around. My heart sank. Gerald was spending my money buying drinks for strangers to maintain his image as a successful businessman. Danny, has he ever mentioned his consulting work to you? The construction projects he's supposedly managing? Danny laughed and wiped down a glass. Are you kidding? That's all he talks about. Big commercial renovations, high-end residential projects, corporate contracts. According to your dad, his business is booming. He's always showing us pictures on his phone of job sites he claims to be managing. Pictures of job sites? Yeah, beautiful stuff. Custom kitchens, office buildings, retail spaces. Your dad's got quite an operation going from what he tells us. I felt sick. Gerald was stealing images from construction websites and pretending they were his own work, using them to support his fictional narrative about professional success. Danny, has my dad ever mentioned me? Talked about his family? Danny's expression shifted slightly. Well, Luke, I don't want to repeat family business, but yeah, he's mentioned you a few times. He's worried about you, seems to think you're having some financial troubles. He's mentioned that you're still single and struggling to get your life together. He said I was having financial troubles. Yeah, something about you not being very responsible with money, maybe spending too much on unnecessary things instead of planning for the future. He seemed concerned that it was affecting your ability to settle down and start a family. The betrayal was complete. Gerald was using my money to buy credibility with strangers, while simultaneously destroying my reputation to explain why I wasn't more successful in my personal life. Danny, one more question. Has my dad ever mentioned anyone being interested in me romantically? Any women who might have asked about me? Danny paused in his glass cleaning and looked uncomfortable. Actually, yeah. There was this woman, Jennifer something, who came in a few months ago asking about you. Really pretty blonde, said she knew you from somewhere. Your dad talked to her for a while at the bar. My blood turned to ice. What did he tell her? Luke, I probably shouldn't repeat this conversation. Danny, please, it's important. Danny sighed and leaned across the bar. He told her you were a good kid, but that you had some personal problems that made you difficult to date. Something about commitment issues and financial instability. He suggested she might want to look for someone more settled and mature. Jennifer from the gym, the woman who'd smiled at me for months before giving up. Gerald had sabotaged my potential relationship while I was funding his bar tab and his reputation as a successful businessman. I thanked Danny and walked out into the parking lot, my phone already ringing with a call from Jake. Luke, we found something big. Patricia discovered that your father has been using your name and social security number to establish utility accounts at 3 different addresses. He's been running up bills and then abandoning the accounts, leaving you liable for the debt. How is that possible? Identity theft, plain and simple. He's got access to all your personal information because you're his son, and he's been using that access to commit fraud on a massive scale. I sat in my car outside Danny's pub, staring at the neon beer signs in the window, while Jake explained the full scope of my father's deception. Gerald hadn't just been taking my money. He'd been systematically destroying my financial future, my personal relationships, and my reputation while building an elaborate fiction about his own success. The man who called me a disappointment had been sabotaging my life for years to cover his tracks and feed his ego. Monday morning found me standing on my parents' front porch with a manila folder full of evidence and a confidence I'd never felt before in my life. 3 days of investigation had transformed me from a confused, guilt-ridden son into someone who finally understood the true scope of the game being played against me. Gerald answered the door in his bathrobe, looking surprised to see me so early. Luke, what are you doing here? It's 7 a.m. We need to talk, Dad. All of us. Is Mom awake? Something in my tone must have warned him that this wasn't going to be another emotional confrontation he could manipulate his way through. His casual demeanor shifted into wariness as he led me into the living room. Sarah appeared from the kitchen, coffee mug in hand, looking nervous about the early morning visit. "Luke, honey, is everything okay? You look so serious." I set the manila folder on the coffee table and took a seat across from both of them, my back straight and my voice steady. "I've spent the weekend investigating our family's financial situation with a professional accountant and a credit counselor. What I discovered is that this family has been the victim of systematic financial fraud for the past 8 years. Gerald's face went pale, but he tried to maintain his bluster. "Luke, I don't know what kind of nonsense you think you've uncovered, but Dad, I'm going to ask you to listen without interrupting. When I'm finished explaining what I've found, you're going to have some choices to make about how you want to handle this situation." I opened the folder and spread out the first set of documents. This is a complete record of every financial transaction between us over the past 8 years. $137,000 transferred from my accounts to yours. But that's just the beginning. Sarah's coffee mug trembled in her hands as she stared at the paperwork. This is documentation of 3 separate credit accounts opened using my personal information without my consent. A home equity line of credit, a business credit card, and a personal loan totaling $28,000 in debt that I'm legally responsible for, but never authorized. Gerald started to speak, but I continued without giving him the opportunity. This is a record of utility accounts opened in my name at addresses where I've never lived, with outstanding balances of over $4,000 that have been turned over to collection agencies. I pulled out another set of papers. These are photographs of forged signatures on loan applications and credit card agreements. I had a handwriting expert examine them over the weekend. The forgeries are sophisticated but detectable under professional analysis. Sarah set down her coffee mug and covered her mouth with both hands. And this is the most interesting discovery of all. I placed a printed spreadsheet in front of them. This is a record of cash withdrawals from your account Dad cross-referenced with the dates of my transfers. Within 24 hours of receiving my money, you were withdrawing large amounts in cash. Over the past 8 years, you've withdrawn nearly $40,000 in cash that can't be accounted for by legitimate household expenses. Gerald's jaw worked silently as he stared at the evidence laid out in front of him. "I know where some of that cash went, Dad. I know about the bar tabs you've been paying to maintain your reputation as a successful businessman. I know about the expensive tools and equipment you've been buying for construction work that doesn't exist. I know about the gambling." Sarah's gasp cut through the silence like a knife. "Gambling, Gerald, what is he talking about?" I pulled out the final document. "Casino loyalty program statements, Dad. Turns out when you use a player's card, they track everything. Over $15,000 in losses at 3 different casinos over the past 2 years, all funded by money I transferred for household expenses." The silence stretched for nearly a minute before Gerald found his voice. "Luke, you don't understand the pressure I've been under. The medical bills, the uncertainty, the shame of not being able to provide for my family. Dad, I'm not here to discuss your motivations. I'm here to discuss your choices going forward." I leaned forward, maintaining eye contact. "You have 2 options. Option 1, you enter gambling addiction treatment immediately. You surrender all credit cards and accounts opened using my information. You provide me with complete access to your financial records going forward. You publicly acknowledge to family members that I've been supporting this household, and you apologize for any misrepresentations you've made about my financial management." Gerald's face turned red, but I wasn't finished. "You'll receive a limited monthly allowance from me, deposited into an account I have oversight of, with every expenditure documented and approved. No more cash withdrawals, no more mysterious expenses. Complete transparency." And option 2, Gerald's voice was barely a whisper. "Option 2 is I file a police report for identity theft and fraud. I pursue full legal action to recover the money you've stolen and clear my name from the debt you've accumulated. I cut off all financial support immediately and let you explain to Mom and Emma and the rest of the family why you're suddenly unable to maintain the lifestyle you've been claiming to afford on your own." Sarah started crying silently, tears streaming down her cheeks as she absorbed the full scope of what her husband had been doing. "Luke, please don't destroy our family over this. Your father made mistakes, but he's not a criminal. Mom, he forged my signature on legal documents. He opened credit accounts using my identity without permission. He's committed multiple felonies while spending years destroying my reputation to cover his tracks." The front door opened suddenly and Emma's voice called out from the foyer. "Mom, Dad, we need to talk about this anniversary party situation. Tom and I have been up all night trying to figure out what's going on." Emma and Tom walked into the living room and stopped short when they saw the papers spread across the coffee table and Sarah crying on the couch. "What's happening here?" Emma asked, her voice tight with concern. "Emma, sit down. There are some things you need to know about Dad's financial situation and how it's been affecting our entire family." Tom noticed the legal documents and bank statements immediately. "Luke, what is all this paperwork?" "It's evidence that Dad has been committing financial fraud for years using money I've been providing to support the family while simultaneously taking credit for generosity that was never his." Emma sank into a chair, her face going white. "What do you mean?" "I mean the money Dad promised you for your anniversary party was actually my money, just like every other time he's helped family members over the past 8 years. Dad hasn't had real income since he lost his construction job. Everything he's been doing, every generous gesture, every financial contribution to family members has been funded by me while he's been telling people I'm irresponsible with money." Tom's anger was immediate and visible. "Are you telling me that Gerald has been lying about his financial situation for years while accepting money from you and then criticizing you to justify his behavior?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you." Emma looked at her father with an expression of complete betrayal. "Dad, is this true? Have you been lying to us about where your money comes from?" Gerald tried one last manipulation attempt. "Emma, honey, family finances are complicated. Luke is making this sound much worse than it actually is." But Emma wasn't buying it this time. "Dad, I need you to look me in the eyes and tell me whether Luke has been paying your bills for the past 8 years, while you've been taking credit for helping other people with his money." The silence stretched until it became unbearable. "Emma, I never meant for things to get this complicated. That's not what I asked you, Dad. I asked you to tell me the truth." Gerald's shoulders slumped in defeat. "Yes, Luke has been supporting us financially. Yes, I've been using his money to help other family members. Yes, I may have given people the wrong impression about where the money was coming from." Emma buried her face in her hands. "Dad, how could you do this? How could you let Luke sacrifice his own life to support us while you criticized him behind his back? How could you take credit for generosity that was never yours?" Tom stood up abruptly. "Gerald, I've listened to you criticize Luke's financial management and his personal life for years. I've heard you suggest that he's not responsible enough to handle money or mature enough to maintain a relationship. Now I find out that you've been living off his earnings while destroying his reputation to cover your own lies. The confrontation I'd been dreading for 8 years was finally happening, but it wasn't playing out the way I'd expected. Instead of defending Gerald or trying to keep the peace, Emma and Tom were holding him accountable for his deception. Luke," Emma said quietly, "I owe you the biggest apology of my life. I've been thanking Dad for generosity that was actually your sacrifice. I've been listening to him criticize you while you were funding the lifestyle that made his criticism possible." She stood up and hugged me fiercely. "I'm so sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry for not seeing what was happening." Gerald made one final attempt to regain control of the narrative. "Luke, you're destroying this family. You're turning everyone against me over money that I would have paid back eventually." But this time, nobody was listening to his manipulation. Tom spoke up with quiet anger. Gerald, you weren't planning to pay anything back. You were planning to keep this arrangement going indefinitely while taking credit for Luke's generosity. That's not borrowing money. That's financial abuse. Looking around the room at my family's faces, I realized the power dynamic had shifted completely. For the first time in 8 years, Gerald's manipulation tactics weren't working because the truth was finally visible to everyone. The man who had called me a disappointment was revealed as someone who had been disappointing everyone who trusted him. The silence in the living room stretched for what felt like hours before Emma finally spoke, her voice shaking with a combination of anger and hurt that I'd never heard from my normally gentle sister. Dad, I need you to explain something to me. When Tom and I got married, you gave us a speech about integrity and family values. You talked about how important it was for us to be honest with each other and build our relationship on trust. Emma's tears had stopped, replaced by something much harder and more determined. You stood up at our wedding reception and told everyone how proud you were of the family you'd raised, how you'd taught us to be responsible and honest people. But for the past 10 years, you've been living a complete lie. Gerald attempted to interrupt, but Emma held up her hand. I'm not finished. Tom and I have been struggling financially for 2 years. We've been eating pasta and canned soup 4 nights a week to save money for this anniversary party. We've been buying our clothes at thrift stores and driving a car that breaks down twice a month because we thought we needed to be responsible and live within our means. Tom nodded grimly, his arms crossed as he stared at Gerald. Meanwhile, Emma continued, we've been listening to you lecture us about financial responsibility while you were living off Luke's income. We've been feeling guilty about asking for help because you taught us that adults should be self-sufficient, but the whole time you weren't self-sufficient at all. Sarah finally spoke up from the couch, her voice barely audible. Emma, honey, your father has been under tremendous pressure since his accident. The medical bills, and the loss of income, and the uncertainty about the future. It's been very difficult for him. Mom, don't. Emma's voice turned sharp. Don't make excuses for him, not anymore. Tom stepped forward, his own anger finally finding its voice. Sarah, with all due respect, Gerald hasn't just been dealing with financial pressure. He's been actively deceiving everyone who trusts him while damaging Luke's reputation to cover his tracks. Tom turned to face Gerald directly. For 3 years, I've been listening to you criticize Luke for being single and suggest that it's because he's not responsible enough to handle adult relationships. You've made comments about his financial priorities and his inability to plan for the future. Gerald tried to speak, but Tom continued. The whole time Luke has been sacrificing his own financial future and his personal relationships to support you. He's been living in a modest apartment and driving an old car while you've been buying expensive tools and gambling away his money. I never meant for it to go this far, Gerald said weakly. But it did go this far, Dad, Emma replied. And you didn't stop it. You kept taking the money and taking the credit and criticizing Luke for problems you were causing. I finally spoke up, my voice steadier than I'd expected. Emma, there's something else you need to know. Dad has been sabotaging my personal relationships to prevent me from getting serious with anyone who might question our financial arrangement. Emma's eyes widened. What do you mean? I mean, he's been interfering when women show interest in me. He's been telling them I have commitment issues and financial problems, warning them away before I even know they're interested. Tom's jaw dropped. He's been blocking your dating life to protect his income stream. That's exactly what he's been doing. Sarah gasped and turned to stare at her husband with an expression of complete horror. Gerald, please tell me, that's not true. Please tell me you haven't been interfering with Luke's relationships. Gerald's silence was answer enough. Emma stood up abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at the front yard with her back to all of us. Dad, I don't think I know who you are anymore. The man I thought I knew wouldn't steal from his own son. He wouldn't lie to his family for years. He wouldn't sabotage his child's happiness to protect his own comfort. When she turned around, her face was set with a determination I'd never seen before. Luke, I want you to know that Tom and I support whatever decision you make about this situation. If you want to pursue legal action, we'll back you completely. If you want to cut Dad off financially, we understand completely. And if you want to set strict boundaries going forward, we'll help you enforce them. Tom nodded emphatically. Luke, what your father has done is inexcusable. Identity theft fraud, emotional manipulation, sabotaging your personal relationships. Any one of those things would be grounds for cutting contact completely. Gerald finally seemed to understand that his usual tactics weren't going to work this time. Luke, son, I know I've made mistakes, but I'm still your father. I still love you and want what's best for you. Dad, if you loved me and wanted what was best for me, you wouldn't have spent 8 years stealing my money while destroying my reputation. You wouldn't have sabotaged my relationships and then mocked me for being single. I pulled out a piece of paper I'd prepared earlier. But I'm willing to give you one chance to make this right. This is a contract that outlines exactly how our financial relationship will work going forward. Gerald took the paper and read through it, his face growing paler with each paragraph. You'll receive $800 per month for basic living expenses deposited into an account I have full access to. Every expenditure over $50 must be approved by me in advance. No cash withdrawals, no credit cards, no gambling. Gerald looked up with panic in his eyes. Luke, $800 won't cover our mortgage and utilities. Dad, that's not my problem anymore. You and Mom are going to have to figure out how to live within your actual means. Sell the house and move into an apartment. Get rid of the expensive car. Cancel the cable and the high-speed internet, and all the other luxuries you've been enjoying on my dime. Sarah started crying again. Luke, please don't punish me for your father's mistakes. I didn't know about the gambling or the forged signatures. Premiate, Mom, you knew I was supporting this household financially, and you knew Dad was taking credit for helping other family members with my money. You may not have known about the fraud, but you knew about the deception, and you chose to stay silent. Emma walked over and sat next to Sarah on the couch. Mom, Luke isn't punishing you. He's asking you to be honest about your financial situation for the first time in 8 years. That's not punishment, that's reality. Gerald crumpled the contract in his hands. I won't accept these terms. I won't be treated like a child by my own son. Then you're choosing option 2, Dad. I'll file the police report tomorrow morning. The room fell silent as everyone processed the implications of Gerald's refusal to accept accountability. Tom spoke first. Gerald, are you seriously going to choose your pride over your family? Are you really going to force Luke to involve law enforcement rather than accept responsibility for what you've done? Emma's voice was barely controlled. Dad, Luke is offering you a way to make this right without destroying your life completely. He could have you arrested tomorrow and be completely justified in doing so. Instead, he's giving you a chance to rebuild some trust and maintain a relationship with your family. Sarah looked at her husband with an expression of complete defeat. Gerald, please sign the contract. Please don't force our son to have you arrested. Please don't destroy what's left of this family over your pride. Gerald stared at the crumpled paper in his hands for a long moment before slowly smoothing it out on the coffee table. If I sign this, what guarantee do I have that you won't change the terms later or cut me off completely? Dad, you don't get guarantees anymore. You forfeited the right to guarantees when you forged my signature and stole my identity. From now on, you get exactly what you earn through honest behavior and accountability. I stood up and grabbed my keys. You have 24 hours to decide. Either you sign that contract and enter gambling addiction treatment, or I contact the police and let them sort this out. As I headed toward the door, Emma called after me. Luke, wait. I want you to know that no matter what Dad decides, Tom and I are proud of you for standing up for yourself. What you did today took incredible courage. Tom added, and we want you to know that you're not responsible for fixing this family or managing Dad's emotions about the consequences of his actions. You've done more than enough. Walking out of that house, I realized that for the first time in 8 years, I wasn't carrying the weight of my family's financial problems on my shoulders. The burden of Gerald's deception and the shame of our dysfunctional dynamic now belonged exactly where it had always belonged, with him. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my new downtown loft, watching the sunrise paint the city skyline in shades of gold and amber that reminded me why I'd always wanted to live in this part of town. The granite countertops, hardwood floors, and floor-to-ceiling windows represented everything I'd dreamed about, but never thought I could afford. The transformation in my life had been so complete and so rapid that sometimes I had to remind myself it was actually real. Gerald had signed the contract. After 24 hours of what Emma described as the most intense soul-searching she'd ever witnessed, he'd put his signature on the accountability agreement and checked himself into a gambling addiction treatment program the following week. The process hadn't been easy for anyone. Gerald's first month in treatment involved daily phone calls to Emma and Sarah, alternating between tearful apologies and angry accusations that the family was abandoning him during his time of need. But the counselors at the treatment center had been explicit about enabling behaviors, and for the first time in years, nobody in our family was willing to make excuses for Gerald's emotional manipulation. Sarah had surprised everyone by enrolling in individual therapy to address what her counselor called codependency and conflict avoidance patterns. I spent so many years trying to keep peace in the house that I forgot there's a difference between peace and pretending problems don't exist. She'd explained to me during one of our weekly coffee meetings. Those coffee meetings had become one of the most unexpected blessings of the entire situation. For the first time in my adult life, Sarah and I had developed an honest relationship built on genuine communication, rather than the careful navigation of Gerald's moods and lies. She'd apologized repeatedly for her silence during the years of financial deception, but more importantly, she'd committed to learning how to have difficult conversations instead of avoiding them. Emma and Tom's marriage had actually grown stronger through the crisis. Finding out that we'd been struggling unnecessarily while Dad was living off your money made us realize how much we can actually accomplish when we work together honestly, Emma had told me. We stopped feeling sorry for ourselves and started taking control of our situation. They'd paid for their anniversary party by downsizing their original plans and asking friends to contribute food and decorations instead of buying gifts. The celebration had been smaller and more intimate than Emma's original vision, but she'd insisted it felt more meaningful because it represented what they'd actually earned together. The most surprising development had been Tom's evolution into one of Gerald's most effective accountability partners. I married into this family, which means I have a responsibility to help keep everyone honest, he'd explained when he volunteered to review Gerald's monthly expense reports. Gerald needs to know that his behavior affects everyone, not just Luke. Gerald himself had been the most dramatic transformation of all. The first 3 months had been rocky with multiple relapses into old patterns of manipulation and self-pity. But the combination of professional counseling medication for his underlying depression and the absolute refusal of his family to enable his behavior had gradually produced genuine change. He'd found part-time work doing estimates for a construction company work that accommodated his physical limitations while rebuilding his sense of professional purpose. His supervisor had praised his attention to detail and his encyclopedic knowledge of building codes, giving Gerald something legitimate to take pride in for the first time in years. More importantly, Gerald had begun acknowledging the full scope of his deception to extended family members and friends. The process had been humiliating for him, but it had also freed everyone from the exhausting charade of pretending his success was real. I spent so many years trying to be the man I thought everyone wanted me to be that I forgot how to be myself, he'd said during our most recent conversation. I was so afraid of being seen as a failure that I became something much worse. As for my own life, the changes had been revolutionary. Moving to the loft had been just the beginning. I'd bought a new car, started taking weekend trips to places I'd always wanted to visit, and most importantly, I'd begun dating without the constant anxiety about money that had paralyzed me for years. Jennifer and I had reconnected 3 months after the confrontation, and she'd been remarkably understanding when I explained the family situation that had prevented me from pursuing her earlier. "I actually thought you weren't interested," she'd laughed. "Your father's conversation with me made it sound like you had commitment issues, but I figured maybe he was just being overprotective." We'd been dating seriously for 4 months now, and for the first time in my adult life, I was experiencing what a normal romantic relationship felt like when it wasn't overshadowed by financial stress and family dysfunction. Jennifer worked as a marketing director for a tech company, and she'd been fascinated rather than judgmental about my family's recovery process. "It sounds like you've all learned how to have honest relationships for the first time," she'd observed. "That's actually pretty amazing." More women had entered my social circle as well, now that Gerald wasn't actively sabotaging my reputation around town. I'd been invited to parties and social events that had never been offered before, and I'd realized how much Gerald's interference had isolated me from potential relationships and friendships. The financial freedom had been intoxicating at first, but it had also taught me valuable lessons about my own relationship with money. I'd opened a savings account for the first time in years and started contributing to a retirement plan that would actually benefit me instead of funding someone else's lifestyle. I'd also established an emergency fund and begun investing in my own future instead of perpetually managing someone else's crisis. The sense of security that came from knowing I could handle unexpected expenses without derailing my entire financial plan was something I'd never experienced as an adult. But perhaps the most meaningful change had been the evolution of my relationship with the concept of family loyalty itself. I'd spent years believing that love meant sacrifice, without boundaries, that being a good son required accepting whatever behavior my parents chose to exhibit. The events of the past 6 months had taught me that real love actually requires accountability, that enabling destructive behavior isn't kindness, it's cruelty disguised as compassion. That sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to participate in their lies. This morning, Emma and Tom were bringing their kids over for breakfast, a monthly tradition we'd started after the family meeting. Sarah would be joining us along with her new boyfriend Robert, a widowed librarian she'd met in her book club who had no connection to our family's previous dysfunction. Gerald would not be joining us. Part of his accountability process involved accepting that he'd lost the privilege of automatic inclusion in family gatherings. He was welcome at planned events when he demonstrated consistent progress, but the era of expecting accommodation regardless of his behavior was permanently over. "It's actually a relief," Sarah had confided to me recently. "I spent so many years managing Gerald's moods and trying to prevent family conflict that I forgot how peaceful gatherings could be when everyone was genuinely happy to be there." As I prepared coffee and set the table for breakfast, my phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer, asking if we were still planning to look at houses that afternoon. We'd been talking about moving in together, and I'd been amazed to discover that I could actually afford the kind of place we both wanted instead of settling for whatever my limited budget allowed. The house hunting had been symbolic of everything else that had changed in my life. For the first time in years, I was making decisions based on what I wanted and what made sense for my future, rather than what I could afford, after fulfilling obligations that had never been fair to begin with. At exactly 9 o'clock, I heard Emma's key turning in the lock, followed by the sounds of her twin 8-year-old daughters racing up the stairs to my loft. "Uncle Luke, can we see the balcony again? Can we help make pancakes?" Emma appeared behind them, carrying a basket of fresh fruit and looking more relaxed than I'd seen her in years. "Good morning, big brother. Tom's parking the car and Mom should be here in about 10 minutes. We moved into the kitchen together, falling into the easy rhythm of family breakfast preparation that we'd never been able to enjoy when every gathering was overshadowed by Gerald's emotional volatility. "Luke, I have something I want to tell you," Emma said as she began slicing strawberries. Tom and I have been talking about what we learned from this whole experience, and we want you to know how much we admire the way you handled everything. Emma, you don't need to thank me. I was just protecting myself. That's exactly my point. You protected yourself, but you did it in a way that gave everyone else the opportunity to grow and change too. You could have just cut Dad off and walked away from all of us. Instead, you created a situation where the truth could come out and the family could heal. Tom arrived carrying coffee from my favorite bakery, along with Sarah and Robert. Good morning, everyone. Beautiful day for family breakfast. Robert had been a wonderful addition to our gatherings. His calm presence and genuine interest in getting to know each of us had provided Sarah with a model of what healthy adult relationships could look like. He'd never known our family during the years of dysfunction, so he treated our current dynamic as normal, rather than remarkable. As we sat around my dining table sharing breakfast and conversation that felt genuinely relaxed and enjoyable, I reflected on the life lesson that had emerged from the most painful period of my adult life. Real family love isn't about obligation or manipulation. It's about supporting each other's growth while maintaining healthy boundaries. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is refusing to enable their worst behaviors. True respect comes from honesty, not control. Looking around the table at my family, I realized we'd all learned something crucial about the difference between loving someone and allowing them to hurt you. We'd discovered that accountability and compassion weren't opposites, but rather two sides of the same commitment to each other's well-being. Sarah was learning to communicate honestly instead of avoiding conflict. Emma and Tom were building financial independence based on realistic planning rather than false expectations. Even Gerald, in his own struggling way, was learning to take responsibility for his choices instead of blaming everyone else for his problems. And I was learning that being a good son didn't require sacrificing my own happiness or accepting disrespectful treatment. I was discovering what it felt like to have relationships built on mutual respect rather than financial obligation. Uncle Luke, one of Emma's daughters, asked as we finished breakfast, "Are you going to marry Jennifer?" The question made everyone laugh, but it also made me realize something important. For the first time in my adult life, marriage felt like a realistic possibility rather than a luxury I couldn't afford. I had the financial stability and emotional freedom to build a life with someone instead of perpetually managing someone else's crisis. "I don't know yet," I told my niece honestly, "but I'm excited to find out." As my family prepared to leave for their various Saturday activities, Emma hugged me tightly at the door. "Luke, I hope you know that you saved this family. Not just from Dad's lies, but from the pattern of dishonesty that was destroying all of us. Emma, we all saved each other. We just finally learned how to tell the truth." After everyone left, I stood on my balcony looking out over the city and thinking about how dramatically my life had changed in just 6 months. The man who'd been called a disappointment by his own father had built a life that exceeded every dream he'd been told he wasn't worthy of achieving. I'd learned that family loyalty wasn't about accepting whatever treatment people chose to give you. Real loyalty meant caring enough about people to hold them accountable for becoming their best selves, even when that accountability was painful. I discovered that financial generosity without boundaries wasn't kindness, it was enabling. That supporting someone's destructive behavior in the name of love actually prevented them from growing and changing. Most importantly, I'd learned that my worth as a person wasn't determined by my father's approval or anyone else's opinion of my life choices. I was responsible for building the life I wanted, and I didn't need permission from people who weren't committed to my happiness. As I prepared to meet Jennifer for our house hunting appointment, I felt grateful for the painful experience that had taught me these lessons. Gerald's betrayal and manipulation had been devastating, but they'd also forced me to develop the boundaries and self-respect that had transformed every aspect of my life. The man who'd once accepted disrespectful treatment because he thought family loyalty required it had learned to expect and create relationships based on honesty, accountability, and mutual respect. And that man was finally ready to build the life he'd always deserved. Before I finish, I want to ask you something that's been on my mind. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where being generous or supportive actually enabled someone else's destructive behavior? How did you find the courage to set boundaries when you knew it might cause conflict? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please consider giving it a like and subscribing for more stories about family dynamics, personal growth, and finding the strength to stand up for yourself when relationships become unhealthy. And if you know someone who might benefit from hearing about the importance of boundaries in family relationships, please share this story with them. Thank you so much for listening to this journey with me. I hope it reminded you that you deserve relationships built on honesty and respect, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to participate in someone else's dysfunction. Take care of yourselves, and remember that your happiness and well-being matter just as much as anyone else's.